remarkable sequence of events. A marriage granted at the age of 6, crowned queen at 7, and widowed by 10. This stark time belongs not only to fiction, but to the real life of Isabelle of Valois, or Isabelle of France. De France in French. Picture a young child, very beyond infancy, thrust onto the European political stage. Instead of a childhood occupied by play, she was compelled into a dynastic marriage with a king over 2 decades, her senior. This narrative delves not into regal triumphs, but into the harsh realities of an era where royal daughters were often strategic assets. Their personal lives and desires were frequently subordinated to the relentless political machinations that forged kingdoms. We explore the poignant and overlooked story of Isabelle of Valois, a child queen whose experience within the imposing halls of power offer a sobering perspective on medieval royalty. I'm sorry enough today. It's also my first time doing a history video like this. I have hay fever and I sound like I have a cold, but I have a bad hay fever. So today I'm going to talk about something I've been on before, but also like to see how they changed Isabella's life and made her life longer than she actually lived. You know, they changed her life like it was Harry Potter, and although the uploaders were very kind to me, at least one of them was, I really wanted to show her life as it truly was. I made some art, I found some artwork to make it more fun. I also have some films. I do not agree with the films. I do like Clement's poesy and all the others, but they're too old to play Isabelle. But okay, I'm just gonna accept the way it is. I want to talk about her short life, how short her life was, her marriage, the political arrangements, how unstable those political arrangements were, and how it all was a Game of Thrones back in the day. How she married Richard II, the one who was also living during the time of the Peasants' Revolt. He was famous of the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, but that's for another time. And I wanted to talk about what her life actually was. Was she unhappy being married to him? Was she unhappy being a queen at such a young age, even though it was way too young, even for medieval standards? And I really want to show you all how innocent she stayed, how her perspective of life was, and how short her life was. So let's get into it. Please comment, please ask questions. If you want to know something, I would love to answer them. And if you have suggestions, I'm also up for them. So let's get into it. Isabelle of Valois was born on the 9th of November 1389. She was born in Louvre Palace in Paris. She was the daughter of King Charles the Sixth of France, whose reign was increasingly overshadowed by his recurrent episodes of severe mental illness. He was called Charles the Mad. He thought he was made of glass. And her mother, Isabelle of Bavaria, contented with a volatile court, destabilized by the king's condition and the relentless ambitions of powerful nobles. Isabelle's formative years were set against the persistent backdrop of the 100 Years' War, a protracted struggle for the French throne that cast a long shadow over both France and England. As a princess of the House of Valois, her existence was one of privilege, intertwined with peril. Her future was not her own to determine. She was viewed as strategic asset, a valuable piece in a diplomatic endeavours of her father and his council. One of 12 children, Isabelle, like many of her contemporaries, witnessed several siblings succumb in infancy, a common tragedy in an era of high child mortality. The French court itself was a volatile area of factions and intrigues, as influential dukes, including Isabelle's uncles, fought for influence over the ailing king, who wasn't a bad man. Please no, he was not a bad man. He just thought he was made of glass, and he was often, a bit deranged. But yeah, that happens with incest. This was the environment that shaped Isabella, a world of regal splendor and inherent danger, where a princess was from birth a component in a complex and often perilous political landscape. In 1396, a pivotal decision irrevocably altered Isabella's life, linking her destiny to England. King Richard II of England, the 29 and widowed following the death of his first wife Anne of Bohemia, who died of the plague in 1394, and who he still mourns till that day, sought a new queen. Well, sought a new queen. He had to find a new queen because he was still very much mourning his wife Anne. More significantly, he aimed to secure a lasting peace with France, because Richard did not like war. Richard wasn't a king for war. He didn't like war at all. Just the interest of this peace was to be Princess Isabella, a child of only 6 years. This was also a lot easier for Richard, so he could still cope with the death of his first wife and treat Isabella more like a daughter than like a wife, since she was just a child and he was not able to consummate the marriage, and just be like a dad to her, which sounded like music to his ears. But there was also a political maneuver, pure and simple. A marriage between the English king and the French princess was intended to ratify a 28-year truce, providing a crucial respite in a grueling 100 Years' War. For Richard, it was also a strategic effort to consolidate his authority, which faced persistent challenges from the influential English nobles. Some historians suggest Richard also envisioned the alliance as a means to gain French backing and potentially counter his domestic political adversaries. Sorry, I'm trying not to, feel like I have a cold. For Charles VI, it represented an opportunity to stabilize his realm, and even at the cost of sending his very young daughter to a foreign country. The betrothal was an elaborate affair, replete with medieval pageantry. Richard II journeyed to Calais to meet his child bride. Which sounds really wrong, but yeah. Contemporary sources, and reportedly Isabella herself, indicated her anticipation at becoming Queen of England. However, it was difficult to ascertain the extent to which a 6-year-old could comprehend the implications of permanently leaving her home and family. Poignantly, her wedding gift included dolls, a stark reminder of her childhood she was compelled to forsake. The marriage ceremony took place on October the 31st, on Halloween, 1396, Somehow in Calais. Isabella, days short of her 7th birthday, was formally wedded to King Richard II. While politically motivated child marriages were not uncommon, a formal marriage ceremony at such a tender age was highly unusual, even by contemporary standards, underscoring the urgency for peace and the immense weight placed upon this union. Crucially, the marriage agreement stipulated that it would not be consummated until Isabella reached the age of 12, in accordance with canon law. Nevertheless, the 6-year-old was now by title the Queen of England. She was like a few days short of her 7th birthday, and she was Queen of England. I think she didn't exactly know what was happening to her, but yeah, it did happen to her. Shortly after the wedding, Isabella departed for England, leaving her native land. As Queen of England, her new existence was characterized by carefully managed seclusion. She was established in her own household at Windsor Castle, attended by a governess in its Madame de Courcy, who was later replaced by Madame Mortimer, and surrounded by ladies in waiting, crowned with a full ceremony at Westminster Abbey in January 1397. At the age of 7, her extreme youth precluded any actual political influence. Her primary role was symbolic, representing the delicate peace accord between England and France. Her relationship with King Richard II, 22 years elder, was reportedly respectful and considerate, and necessarily platonic given her age. Richard, who had been devoted to his first wife Anne but had no children from that union, appears to have treated Isabella with a kind paternalistic affection. Accounts suggest he visited her, engaged in play, and sought to amuse her, behaving more as a guardian than husband, more like a father. She was, in essence, a royal ward, being groomed for her future role as the English queen. Despite the king's apparent benevolence, Isabella's life must have been profoundly solitary. Separated from her family, she resided in a foreign country with unfamiliar languages and costumes. Her days were likely structured around education, religious tutelage, and rigorous preparation for her eventual duties as a queen consort. A childhood lived under an extraordinary pressure and unusual circumstances, even for medieval standards. While Richard may have viewed her youth as an advantage, allowing her to be assimilated into the English costumes, for Isabella it meant maturing under the intense scrutiny of a court anxious for an heir. She was years from being able to provide. This delay in producing an heir did little to endear the marriage to certain factions in England. Concurrently, Richard II's reign was becoming increasingly precarious. His style of governance relies on a select group of favourites, and even alienating powerful nobles, the peace within, and then also the peace in France, which Isabella embodied, was itself unpopular with elements in England who advocated for a continued warfare. They wanted France to be a part of England. The political foundations of the English throne were unstable, and the young queen, innocent and isolated, was situated unknowingly at the recipes of a significant upheaval. The carefully constructed peace and Isabella's unique life as a child queen were not destined to endure. The political tensions that had been mounting throughout Richard II's reign culminated in crisis in 1399. While Richard was engaged in a military campaign in Ireland, his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Hereford, who was previously exiled by Richard, returned to England. Initially, Bolingbroke asserted he sought only to the restoration of his confiscated lands. However, he swiftly garnered support from disaffected nobles, and his ambitions soon extended to the crown itself. Richard returned to find his authority critically undermined. He was captured, imprisoned, and formally deposed in September 1399. Henry Bolingbroke then ascended the throne, and as King Henry IV. For Isabella, approaching her 10th birthday, this represented a catastrophic turn of events. The king who had shown her kindness, was now a captive. She herself was placed under house arrest, initially in Berkshire, and was moved between locations under the guise of protection. So to say. In reality, she was a valuable hostage of the new Lancastrian regime. The precise fate of Richard II remains a subject of historical debate, but it is widely accepted that he died in Pontefract Castle around February 1400. Some say Valentine's Day, but it's not exactly sure, either to murder or orchestrated by Henry IV from starvation, possibly self-induced. At the age of 10, Isabelle of Valois was now a widow. The crown she had worn for 3 years, a symbol of a now fractured peace, was lost. Her protector and primary connection to her life in England was gone. She found herself as a solitary child in a hostile political environment, her future contingent upon the calculation of the new English king. Her widowhood placed Isabella in an even more vulnerable position. No longer queen consort, she was dowager of a deposed and likely murdered king. Crucially, she was a French princess in the custody of a new English dynasty, striving for legitimacy. Henry IV perceived an opportunity in the young widow. He promptly proposed that Isabella could marry his son, Prince Henry of Monmouth, the future Henry V, the King of War, the one who would marry her sister, Catherine of Valois. This union could offer the continuity and strengthen the Anglo-French relations, and help solidify the Lancastrian claim to the throne. However, Isabella, despite her youth, displayed remarkable fortitude and unwavering loyalty to Richard's memory. Deeply affected by her husband's fate, and in mourning, she rejected the offer. Accounts describe her profound grief and refusal to cooperate with the new king's designs. She was not the compliant figure Henry IV might have anticipated. Her affection for Richard, who had treated her more as a daughter than a bride, was evidently sincere. She continued her presence in England and became a significant diplomatic challenge. Her father, Charles of France, insisted on her immediate return, along with her substantial dowry and jewels. Henry IV, however, declined. She was such a political asset, a valuable political asset, and he wasn't eager to return the dowry as well. For some time she had to stay in England, and she was subject of the protracted and often strange negotiations between the English and French courts. Her jewels were reportedly confiscated and distributed among Henry IV's children, and his council declared she had no right to dower lands. During this period of diplomatic uncertainty, young Elizabeth was indirectly implicated in conspiracies against Henry IV, such as the Epiphany Rising and attempt by Richard II's loyalists to overthrow the new king. Although her household was targeted, her youth and lack of direct involvement likely shielded her from severe repercussions. She was a queen without a throne, a powerless widow, a child whose grief and loyalty served as her primary defenses against the machinations of a powerful man. Again, a real Game of Thrones. So, after a lot of negotiations, Henry IV eventually consented to Isabella's return to France. In August 1401, the young Dowager Queen, only 11 years old, departed England. She left the country where she had been briefly crowned and subsequently tragically widowed. She returned with the jewels, though not her entire dowry, which remained a significant point of dispute. Upon return to France, Isabella was received with joy. Her parents wanted her to return, and she was embraced with kindness. But still, her life remained subject to political considerations. As a former Queen of England and a French princess, she was a highly sought-after candidate in the European dynastic marriage market. For several years she resided in France, like navigating the complex political environment of her father's court, which continued to be plagued by his mental instability and the rivalries of powerful nobles. Her respite from politically motivated marriage was not to last. In 1406, at the age of 16, Isabella married again. This time to her first cousin, Charles the young Duke of Orleans. Charles was only 11 or 12 years old at the time. Another union but Isabella was the elder, so this time she was the elder one, though both were still very young. A story of sources suggests Isabella may have ended this marriage with considerable reluctance. Some accounts change throughout the entire ceremony. It is plausible that her loyalty to Richard's memory persisted, or perhaps she simply desired to life free from the political machinations that had come to her existence since early childhood. But yeah, she probably already knew she couldn't escape that, but you could always wish. Her new father-in-law, Louis, Duke of Orleans, was influential and often controversial figure in French politics, and that royalty had initially opposed the marriage to Richard II. His assassination in November 1407, orchestrated by John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, plunged France deeper into civil conflict between the Armagnac, in other words, Orleanists and Burgundian factions. This internal strife would have dire consequences for the kingdom. Isabella, now the Dutch of Orleans, once again found herself at the centre of a perilous political crisis, this time within her native land. Isabella's second marriage to Charles, Duke of Orleans, was also fated to be tragically short, notwithstanding the political turmoil consuming France and any personal reservations she may have harbored about another arranged marriage. She fulfilled a primary expectation of a medieval noble woman. She bore a child. In September 1409, Isabella gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Jean, in France. However, this maternal chapter was cruelly brief. After giving birth on September 13th, 1409, Isabella of Valois died. She was only 19 years old. The cause of her death is generally attributed to complications arising from childbirth, a sadly common fate for women in that period. Regardless of their social standing, her death marked a quiet conclusion to her life, lived largely in the public sphere, yet characterized by private sorrow and relentless political pressures. Her father, King Charles VI, was reportedly so afflicted by his mental illness that he could not fully comprehend the loss of his eldest daughter. Her young husband, Charles Orleans, himself a renowned poet, would later endure his only significant adversities. He was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 and spent 25 years as a prisoner, so this wasn't that to experience it. As some people say, he was a prisoner in England, but she had already passed away. Ironically, it was also at Pontefract Castle, the same location where Isabella's first husband, Richard II, is believed to have died. So, she was there when he, was captured. She was already dead. And that's really hurt a lot of people say she was still alive and she was able to see her daughter, because she would have loved to see her daughter. But she couldn't. Childbirth was something that could kill people, even when Victoria was alive, it could still kill people. Isabella's daughter, Jean of Valois, or Jean, survived in infancy and married John II, Duke of Alençon. However, Joe himself died relatively young in 1431 without surviving issue, meaning Isabella's direct lineage came to an end. Isabella was interred in the Abbey of Salem in Blois. Her remains were subsequently transported in 1624 to the Saddest convent in Paris, a prominent burial site for French royalty, which was later desecrated during the French Revolution. Isabella of Valois, 19 years were marked by experience in royal courts, complex political maneuvers, profound personal loss, ultimately early death. From her first marriage at the age of 6, her life was shaped by the ambitions and alliances of monarchs in their kingdoms. She served as a symbol of peace, a child queen in a foreign country, a grieving young widow helped by her husband's successor, and finally a duchess in a conflict-ridden home. Her life ending as she reached adulthood. The narrative is a quintessential example of a political pawn. The first marriage related to Richard II with an attempt to bridge the divide between England and France. But the resultant peace was fragile and short-lived. Richard's deposition and death negated any potential long-term diplomatic advantages of the Union. Her refusal to marry Henry the Fourth's son effectively toward England's attempt to use her to further legitimize the new dynasty. Her second marriage to Charles of Orleans placed her at the centre of her key faction in a deeply divided France, but the premature death prevented her from playing the significant and enduring role in these internal conflicts. While her younger sister, Catherine of Valois, would later marry Henry V of England and become the mother of King Henry VI, thereby linking the two royal houses in a manner that contributed to the Wars of Roses, Isabella's own dynastic influence was diminished with the early death of her daughter. The story of Isabella of Valois is not one of major political triumphs or traditional queenly influence. Rather, it's a poignant human tragedy, a cautionary account of the era. It underscores the immense personal toil of medieval power politics, particularly for royal women and children who were often treated as instruments of state. Moved across the political chessboard of Europe, her personal desires were largely disregarded by those wielding power. Her quiet resistance, her loyalty, her tragically short life, serve as a compelling reminder of the young lives often consumed by the relentless pursuit of power and dynastic ambitions. Isabelle of Valois, the tragic childhood queen, remains a somber figure, her life a poignant echo of the demanding and forgiving periods of history. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you have any recommendations, please let us know. We love English, French, Italian, and Spanish history. Very open for historic requests involving these countries. If you have any other requests that are into dark history, like the Salem witch trials, we also look for that. And we try to become better. Please do not, harm us by the rules yet, please. It's we're doing our best to make great videos. I'll see you next time. Ciao.